There was a time when even family cars had style, a lot of style. And honestly, some of these wagons had more presence than many sports cars of their era, because today when most people think about a wagon, they imagine something practical, boring, built only for families. But in the 1950s and 1960s, American wagons were something completely different. They were designed to attract attention, to look special. So, in this video, you're going to discover some of the most beautiful and sexy American wagons ever created. And some of them, honestly, still feel impossible to ignore today. 1955, Chevrolet Nomad. This wagon shouldn't look this good. And honestly, maybe no other American wagon captures the elegance of the 1950s better than the Nomad. Because even today, more than half a century later, it still grabs attention immediately. Imagine the impact. Most wagons of the era were still seen simply as family cars, practical, utilitarian, and then Chevrolet showed up with this, a low, sporty wagon, full of personality, with lines that felt much closer to a luxury coupe than a traditional family car. And that's exactly where the Nomad's magic comes from, because this car doesn't feel designed around practicality. It feels designed around style, the sloping roofline, the exclusive chrome ribs across the rear section, the enormous amount of refined detailing. Everything projects presence. And honestly, it's difficult to find another American wagon with this much visual personality. There's an important detail. The Nomad shared much of its inspiration with the Corvette of the same era, and that helped give it far sportier and more elegant proportions than other American wagons of the 1950s. And that completely changed its image, because it didn't look like just another wagon. It looked special. Under the hood, it could be equipped with powerful V8 engines for the time, transforming the Nomad into something far more interesting than simply a beautiful family car. And that helped strengthen its reputation even more. When you look at the rear of the Nomad, it's impossible not to understand why it became a legend. The combination of the slanted rear glass, the chrome trim, and the low proportions makes the car look almost like a concept car built for production. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1955 Chevrolet Nomad can easily exceed $150,000 depending on condition and originality. 1970 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate. This wagon looks gigantic, and that's exactly why its presence is so impressive. Because the Kingswood Estate represents the moment when American wagons reached an almost absurd level of luxury, size, and style. And honestly, very few wagons manage to project this much personality. Imagine the scene. Early 1970s, American cars becoming longer, lower, more exaggerated, and Chevrolet transforming a simple family wagon into something that looked like a luxury ocean liner on wheels. The result was this monster, an enormous wagon, elegant, filled with chrome, with a presence impossible to ignore, and that's exactly the Kingswood Estate's magic. Because this car doesn't try to look sporty, it tries to look important. The massive proportions, the huge front grille, the long flowing lines, and the famous wood grain side panels. Everything projects classic American luxury, and honestly, that gives it a completely different kind of charm compared to the rest of this list. There's an important detail. The Kingswood Estate was one of Chevrolet's most luxurious and sophisticated wagons, featuring enormous interiors, multiple rows of seating, and an absurdly high level of comfort for the era. But even then, it still carried enormous visual presence, especially because of the way it combined size and elegance. Under the hood, it could be equipped with massive Chevrolet V8 engines, including extremely powerful big block options for a family wagon, and that made the entire experience even more absurd. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A well-preserved Chevrolet Kingswood Estate can easily exceed $60,000, depending on configuration and originality. 1958 Oldsmobile Fiesta. This wagon looks like a mix between a luxury car and a spaceship, and honestly, that's exactly what makes it so incredible. Because by the late 1950s, American manufacturers had practically lost their fear of design. Tail fins grew larger every year, chrome seemed endless, and some cars were beginning to look completely unreal. And the Fiesta wagon may be one of the greatest examples of that. Imagine the impact, an enormous wagon, impossibly low, filled with futuristic details, with a visual presence that looked pulled straight out of a 1950s science fiction movie. And even then, it still managed to feel elegant, because the Fiesta accomplishes something very difficult, being excessive, without ever stopping being beautiful. The gigantic rear fins, the heavily chromed front end, the long, low body, everything feels designed to attract attention. And honestly, it works perfectly. There's an important detail. The Fiesta wagon was one of Oldsmobile's most exclusive and sophisticated wagons, sharing much of its design and luxury with the brand's premium models. And that helped give it a far more refined personality than many traditional family wagons. Under the hood, it could be equipped with massive rocket V8 engines, making this gigantic car not only visually imposing, but also seriously powerful for its time. When you look at its value today, a 1958 Oldsmobile Fiesta wagon can easily exceed $80,000 depending on condition and originality. And now, I want to know something. Which wagon style feels more incredible to you so far? The more elegant ones like the Nomad, or these gigantic futuristic wagons filled with chrome and presence? Let me know in the comments. 1968 to 1970 Buick Sport. This wagon doesn't look like a traditional family car. It looks like a grand touring car disguised as a wagon, and honestly, that's exactly what makes it so special. A low, elegant, perfectly balanced wagon, with a silhouette that felt far sportier than anyone expected from a family car. And that's exactly where the sport wagon's magic comes from, because this car doesn't depend on visual excess. It depends on proportion. The long body, the low stance, the smooth, sophisticated lines. Everything projects classic American elegance. But there's one detail that completely transforms the car. The famous Vista Cruiser roof, those massive raised skylight windows above the second row, gave the interior a much more open and futuristic feeling, while also creating a completely unique visual identity. And honestly, that made this wagon feel far more special than any rival of the era. Under the hood, the sport wagon could be equipped with large Buick V8 engines, delivering much more power than most people expected from an elegant family wagon. And that strengthened its personality even more, because this car looked refined, but it still had a true American soul. When you look at the side profile, everything feels incredibly harmonious. And maybe that's why this wagon aged so well, because it doesn't feel exaggerated. It feels sophisticated. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A well-preserved Buick Sport wagon can easily exceed $50,000, depending on configuration and originality. 1960 Plymouth Fury Suburban. This wagon looks like a 1960s rocket ship on wheels. And honestly, very few American cars project this much visual personality, because the Fury Suburban belongs to an era when American manufacturers were completely obsessed with the future. Massive fins, aircraft-inspired styling, endless chrome, exaggerated shapes, and Plymouth pushed all of that to the extreme. The result was this wagon, long, impossibly low, aggressive, with a silhouette that feels pulled directly from a vintage science fiction movie. And that's exactly what makes it so special, because this car doesn't try to look subtle. It wants attention. The enormous rear fins, the aggressive front end, the sharp lines, and the gigantic amount of chrome detailing. Everything feels designed to impress. And honestly, it still works today. Under the hood, the Fury Suburban could be equipped with massive Mopar V8 engines, delivering far more power than most people expected when looking at a family wagon. And that made the car even more interesting, because beneath all that futuristic styling, there was still a giant American machine full of brute force. When you look inside, the feeling continues. Huge dashboard panels, chrome everywhere, futuristic steering wheel. Everything feels like it came from another era. An era when cars were supposed to look like the future, when you look at its value today. That reflects it too. A 1960 Plymouth Fury Suburban can easily exceed $70,000 depending on originality and condition. 1957 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. This wagon feels like an American experiment that somehow made it into production. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. Because while other wagons of the era tried to look elegant or sporty, The Turnpike cruiser wagon wanted to look like the future, literally. Imagine the scene. America completely obsessed with airplanes, rockets, futuristic highways, and manufacturers trying to transform all of that imagination into real cars. And Mercury pushed that idea much further than most. The result was this insanity, a gigantic wagon filled with strange curves, chrome details everywhere, and styling solutions that still look absurdly futuristic today. And that's exactly the charm of this car. Because the Turnpike Cruiser doesn't look like a conventional wagon. It looks like a concept car escaping from a 1950s auto show. The panoramic windshield, the enormous fins, the floating roofline, the chrome detailing around the windows. Everything feels exaggerated, but in a very intentional way. Under the hood, massive Mercury V8 engines gave the wagon far more power than its almost cartoonish appearance would suggest. And that made the entire experience even more absurd. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Mercury Turnpike cruiser wagon can easily exceed $80,000, depending on originality and condition. And now, I want to know something. What type of classic wagon feels more interesting to you? The elegant and refined ones? Or these futuristic wagons that seem completely out of control? Let me know in the comments. 1969. Ford Country Squire. This wagon doesn't try to look sporty, and that's exactly why it has so much charm. Because the Country Squire represents a very specific idea of American luxury, an era when a family car could still project elegance, presence, and a sense of grandeur that today has almost completely disappeared. And honestly, very few wagons manage to feel this cinematic. Imagine the scene, late 1960s, endless American highways, family road trips, roadside motels, gas stations glowing at night. And in the middle of all that, this gigantic wagon appears with its wood-grain side panels, and instantly it feels like part of a movie. There's an important detail. The Country Squire spent years as one of Ford's most luxurious and iconic wagons, becoming almost a symbol of upper-middle-class American families throughout the 1960s and 1970s. And that helped turn the car into a true cultural icon. Under the hood, massive Ford V8 engines gave this wagon far more power than its calm appearance suggested. And that made the car even more interesting, because beneath all that relaxed elegance, there was still a giant classic American automobile. When you look inside, everything continues exactly the same way. Huge seats, endless space, chrome detailing, wood-grain panels, everything feels designed around absolute comfort. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A well-preserved Ford Country Squire can easily exceed $50,000 depending on configuration and originality. 1958 Pontiac Safari. This wagon looks far too elegant to be a family car, and honestly, that's exactly why it still feels so special today. Because the Pontiac Safari represents one of the moments when American wagons stopped looking merely practical and started looking like genuine luxury cars. Imagine the context, late 1950s, Pontiac going through one of the strongest design eras in its entire history, creating cars that became lower, more aggressive, and full of personality. And the Safari brought all of that into the wagon world. The result was this: an enormous wagon, sophisticated, incredibly eye-catching, with lines that felt much closer to a luxury coupe than a traditional family car. And that's exactly the Safari's magic. Because this car doesn't project practicality, it projects presence. The enormous rear fins, the gigantic chrome grille, the low flowing lines, and the huge amount of visual detailing. Everything feels designed to attract attention. But unlike many exaggerated late 1950s cars, the Safari still manages to feel elegant, and honestly, that's very difficult to achieve. Under the hood, massive Pontiac V8 engines gave the Safari far more strength than its refined appearance suggested. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1958 Pontiac Safari can easily exceed $90,000, depending on condition and originality. And when you look at all these wagons together, you begin to realize something very interesting about classic American cars. There was a time when even a family car could have presence, real presence. Because these wagons were never designed only to carry luggage or children. They were designed to impress. Now, I want to know something. Which wagon in the entire video felt the sexiest and most elegant to you? The one you would still stop and stare at in a parking lot today? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the complete opposite side of these classic wagons, you need to watch this video about the fastest wagons of the 1950s. Because some of them not only looked incredible, they were also absurdly fast. See you in the next video.